The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Enterprises boardroom, each drop a tiny percussion note in the symphony of grief that filled the room. Donovan Sterling sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his posture perfect, his Brioni suit without a single wrinkle, his face a carefully composed mask of sorrow. He looked every inch, the heir apparent, the crown prince ascending to his rightful throne. At 35, he was the spitting image of his father, the same sharp jawline, the same calculating eyes, the same air of absolute certainty that came from a lifetime of never being told no. Across from him, Caleb Sterling looked like he'd been dragged through hell and left to dry in the gutter. At 32, he was 3 years younger, but looked a decade older. His rented suit hung awkwardly on his thin frame, the fabric cheap and shiny under the harsh boardroom lights. His tie was crooked, his shoes were scuffed, and his eyes, bloodshot and hollow, told the story of a man who had spent the previous night doing exactly what everyone expected him to do, drinking himself into oblivion at some dive bar on the South Side. Between them sat Jonathan Whitmore, the family lawyer, a man so old he seemed to have been carved from the same ancient wood as the table itself. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat, the sound like gravel shifting in a tin can. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice a dry, papery whisper, "we are here to execute the last will and testament of Harrison Beaumont Sterling. May he rest in peace." Donovan nodded solemnly. Caleb just stared at his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. He'd been sober for exactly 48 hours, the longest stretch in 6 months, and his body was screaming at him for it. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, the lawyer, the accountants, the board members who had been summoned to bear witness to this moment. They were all waiting for him to screw up, to say something inappropriate, to stumble out of the room and prove, once again, that he was exactly what they all thought he was, a failure. Whitmore opened the leather-bound folder and began to read. The will was exactly what everyone expected. Harrison Sterling had been many things, a visionary, a tyrant, a genius, a bastard, but he had never been unpredictable. The empire he had built from nothing, the $50 million in real estate holdings, the brownstone in Lincoln Park worth $8 million alone, the penthouse on the Gold Coast, the vacation home in Aspen, the collection of vintage cars, the art, the investments, all of it, every single dollar, every single brick was left to Donovan. "To my eldest son, Donovan," Whitmore read, his voice echoing in the silent room, "I leave the entirety of Sterling Enterprises with the full confidence that he will protect and expand the legacy I have built. He has proven himself to be a man of vision, of discipline, of character. He is my true heir." Donovan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was his moment, the moment he had been preparing for his entire life. He glanced at his brother, expecting to see defeat, to see shame, to see the final, crushing acknowledgement that Caleb had lost, that he had always been destined to lose. But Caleb wasn't looking at him. He was staring at the rain-streaked windows, his expression unreadable, his jaw clenched tight. Whitmore continued, "To my youngest son, Caleb, I leave a trust fund in the amount of $100,000 to be dispersed in monthly installments of $2,000, with the hope that this modest sum will provide him with the stability he has never been able to achieve on his own." A modest sum. The words hung in the air like a slap. $100,000. It was pocket change, an insult wrapped in the language of charity. And then, the final twist of the knife. Whitmore cleared his throat again, his discomfort palpable. "Your father also left a personal note to be read aloud. He wrote, and I quote, 'Caleb, may this be enough to keep you from completely destroying yourself. It is more than you have earned, and more than you deserve. I pray that one day you will find the strength to become even a fraction of the man your brother is.'" The room was silent. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. Caleb felt the heat rising in his chest. the familiar burn of shame and rage that had fueled so many of his worst decisions. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes still fixed on the rain. Donovan leaned forward, his voice dripping with a sympathy that was as fake as a $3 bill. "Caleb, I'm so sorry. You know I'll always be here for you. If you need anything, anything at all, you just have to ask. We're family." Caleb finally looked at him, and for a brief, flickering moment, Donovan saw something in his brother's eyes that made him uneasy. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't shame. It was something else, something cold and calculating, something that looked almost like amusement. "Thanks, Donovan," Caleb said quietly, his voice steady. "I appreciate that." He stood up, took the check that Whitmore slid across the table, $2,000, the first of many tiny, humiliating payments, and walked out of the boardroom without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Donovan turned his attention back to the lawyer, already mentally cataloging the changes he would make, the deals he would close, the empire he would expand. He had won. He had everything, and Caleb had nothing. Or so he thought. 3 months after the funeral, Donovan Sterling was living the life he had always dreamed of. He had moved into the Lincoln Park brownstone, his father's fortress, and had immediately set about making it his own. He'd hired an interior designer, some pretentious woman from New York, who charged $5,000 just to walk through the door, and had gutted the place, replacing his father's dark, oppressive Victorian aesthetic with something sleek, modern, and aggressively expensive. Everything was white marble and chrome, glass and light. It looked like the inside of a spaceship, cold and sterile and utterly devoid of soul. He threw a party to celebrate, a celebration of life for his father, that was really just an excuse to show off. He invited everyone who was anyone in Chicago, politicians, CEOs, socialites, the kind of people who measured their worth in zeros and their influence in favors owed. The champagne flowed, the catering was obscene, and Donovan stood in the center of it all, holding court like a king. That was where he met Isabella Crane. She was standing by the fireplace, a glass of champagne in her hand, her dress a shimmering column of gold that clung to her like a second skin. She was beautiful in the way that only truly dangerous women are: sharp cheekbones, full lips painted the color of blood, eyes that were a startling shade of green and seemed to see straight through you. She was a fixture in Chicago's social scene, the kind of woman who was always at the right party, always on the arm of the right man, always one step ahead of the gossip. Donovan was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. "You must be the new king," she said when he approached, her voice a low, sultry purr. "I've heard so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Donovan said, flashing his most charming smile. "Oh, the best," she said, her eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement or might have been hunger. "They say you're going to be even bigger than your father, that you're a visionary." Donovan felt a thrill run through him. This was what he craved: validation, admiration, the acknowledgement that he was not just his father's son, but his own man, a man who would eclipse the old titan and build something even greater. "I'm certainly going to try," he said. Isabella smiled, a slow, predatory smile. "I have no doubt you'll succeed. You have that look about you. The look of a man who always gets what he wants." She was right. Of course. Donovan always got what he wanted, and what he wanted, in that moment, was her. They became inseparable. Isabella was everything Donovan had ever wanted in a partner: beautiful, sophisticated, ambitious. She understood the game, the delicate dance of power and influence that defined their world. She was also, though Donovan didn't realize it at the time, a master manipulator, a woman who saw him not as a man, but as a means to an end. She encouraged his worst impulses. When he talked about taking risks, about making bold moves that would set him apart from his father's conservative approach, She would lean in close, her hand on his arm, her voice a seductive whisper. "You're a genius, Donovan. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You need to think bigger. Your father was great, but you're going to be legendary." And Donovan, desperate for that validation, desperate to prove that he was more than just his father's shadow, listened.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
He started making moves, big moves, reckless moves. He poured $15 million into a luxury condo development on the South Side, a project his father had looked at and rejected as too risky. The neighborhood was in transition, the market was uncertain, and the profit margins were razor thin. But Donovan saw it as an opportunity to make a statement, to show the world that he was bold, that he was fearless, that he was willing to take the kinds of risks that his father never would. Isabella was there every step of the way, cheering him on, telling him how brilliant he was, how visionary. She was also spending his money like water, private jets to Paris for the weekend. A new yacht, a sleek, obscenely expensive Italian-made vessel he christened the Golden Boy. Diamond necklaces, designer dresses, bottles of champagne that cost more than most people made in a month. Donovan didn't care. He was in love, or at least he thought he was. And besides, he had $50 million. What was a few million here and there? Meanwhile, Caleb had vanished. He'd taken his first check, cashed it, and disappeared from Chicago without a trace. The rumors swirled. Some said he'd gone back to rehab. Others said he'd overdosed in some flophouse and his body just hadn't been found yet. A few claimed they'd seen him panhandling on the streets of Detroit. Donovan didn't care. As far as he was concerned, his brother was dead, a ghost, a cautionary tale he could trot out at dinner parties to illustrate the dangers of weakness and lack of discipline. But Caleb wasn't dead. He was in Detroit, in a tiny one-bedroom apartment above a bodega, living on ramen noodles and black coffee, working 18-hour days. He'd used his first few checks to buy tools, to rent a truck, to hire a small crew of day laborers. He'd started a construction company, Sterling Renovations, and had begun bidding on small jobs, renovating old houses in neighborhoods that had been forgotten by everyone else. It was hard, brutal work. His hands were covered in calluses, his back ached every morning, and there were nights when he lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. But he was sober. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly, completely sober. And he was building something real, something that was his. And every night, before he went to sleep, he would pull out his phone and scroll through the news articles about his brother, about the parties, the yacht, the beautiful woman on his arm, the bold new development that was going to revolutionize Chicago real estate. And he would smile, a cold, knowing smile. Because he knew something that Donovan didn't. He knew that his brother was a house of cards, a beautiful, glittering facade with nothing behind it. And he knew that when the wind came, and it would come, that house would collapse. The first sign of trouble came 6 months into the South Side development. The permits, which were supposed to be a formality, got held up in bureaucratic red tape. Then the contractors, a firm Donovan had hired based on a recommendation from one of Isabella's friends, started missing deadlines. Then the costs started ballooning. What was supposed to be a $15 million project was now pushing $25 million, and they were only halfway done. Donovan sat in his office, staring at the spreadsheets, the numbers swimming before his eyes. He'd been drinking more lately, expensive scotch that he told himself was just to take the edge off, just to help him think. But the truth was, he was scared. For the first time in his life, he was genuinely, bone-deep scared. He called a meeting with his senior team, the men his father had trusted, the men who had built Sterling Enterprises into what it was. They sat around the conference table, their faces grim, their silence damning. "We need to pull the plug," said Gerald Hoffman, the CFO, a man who had been with the company for 30 years. cut our losses and walk away. The market's turned. We're not going to make our money back on this." "Absolutely not," Donovan snapped, his voice sharper than he intended. "We're committed. We're going to see this through." "Donovan," Gerald said, his voice patient, the tone of a man talking to a child. "Your father would have walked away. He knew when to fold." "I'm not my father," Donovan said, and the words came out harsher, more bitter than he'd meant them to. "I'm building something bigger, something better." Gerald just looked at him, his expression unreadable. "I hope you're right." But Donovan wasn't right. The development continued to hemorrhage money. The market, which had been softening, collapsed entirely. The luxury condos that were supposed to sell for $1 million each were now sitting empty, and the few buyers who had put down deposits were threatening to sue. The banks, which had been so eager to lend him money when he was riding high, were now calling in their loans, demanding payment, threatening foreclosure. And Isabella? Isabella was nowhere to be found when the bills came due. She was always busy, always at some charity event or spa day or shopping trip. And when Donovan tried to talk to her about it, tried to tell her that they needed to cut back, to be more careful, she would just laugh, that beautiful, tinkling laugh that used to make his heart race and now just made him feel small. "Don't be ridiculous, Donovan," she would say, waving her hand dismissively. "You're a Sterling. Money is what you do. This is just a bump in the road. You'll figure it out." But he wasn't figuring it out. He was drowning. Meanwhile, in Detroit, Caleb was thriving. His little construction company had grown. He'd hired a full-time crew, bought better equipment, started taking on bigger projects. He had a reputation now, honest, reliable, fair. He paid his workers well, showed up on time, did quality work. In a city that had been gutted by corruption and broken promises, Caleb Sterling was a man people could trust. He'd also been quietly buying property. Small stuff, at first foreclosed homes, abandoned lots, buildings that no one else wanted. He'd renovate them, turn them into affordable housing, and either rent them out or sell them at a modest profit. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it was growing. And he'd been watching. Oh, he'd been watching. He followed every move his brother made, every article in the business press, every filing with the city. He knew about the South Side development. He knew about the cost overruns. He knew about the loans. And he knew, with a cold, clinical certainty, that his brother was about to fall. The unraveling happened fast. One of Donovan's major investors, a hedge fund that had put in $10 million, pulled out, citing concerns about project viability. That triggered a clause in the loan agreement with the bank, which immediately called in the entire debt, $35 million, due in 90 days. Donovan scrambled. He tried to refinance. He tried to find new investors. He tried to sell off other assets to cover the shortfall, but no one wanted to touch him. The word was out. Donovan Sterling was in trouble. Donovan Sterling was a bad bet. He fired Gerald and the rest of his father's old guard, convinced they were sabotaging him, that they were jealous of his vision. He brought in a new team, young, hungry guys who promised they could turn it around, but they were sharks, and they smelled blood in the water. They started stripping the company, selling off properties for pennies on the dollar, pocketing the commissions, and leaving Donovan with nothing but debt. His relationship with Isabella deteriorated. She was cold now, distant. She stopped coming to the brownstone, stopped answering his calls. And then, one night, he saw her at a restaurant, laughing, her hand on the arm of another man, a tech billionaire, someone with real money, someone who wasn't drowning in debt. Donovan confronted her outside, his voice shaking with rage and humiliation. "What the hell are you doing, Isabella?" She looked at him, her beautiful face a mask of cold indifference. "I'm doing what I've always done, Donovan. I'm surviving. You were fun for a while, but let's be honest, you're not your father. You're not even close. You're a spoiled little boy who thought he could play in the big leagues, and now you're broke. I don't do broke." She walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement, and Donovan stood there, alone in the cold Chicago night, feeling something inside him break. The bankruptcy filing made the front page of every newspaper in the city. Sterling Enterprises collapses, the fall of a dynasty. The articles were brutal, dissecting every mistake, every bad decision, every moment of arrogance and hubris. Donovan was a punchline, a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything that was wrong with entitled rich kids who thought they could coast on their father's name. He lost everything. The brownstone was seized by the bank, the penthouse, the cars, the yacht, all sold at auction. His personal accounts were drained to pay creditors. He moved into a small, dingy apartment in a building that smelled like mildew and despair, the kind of place he used to drive past without even noticing. He stopped shaving, stopped showering, stopped caring. He would sit in his empty apartment, drinking cheap vodka straight from the bottle, staring at the walls, replaying every decision, every moment, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. And then, one day, there was a knock on the door. It was Caleb. He looked different, healthy, strong. He was wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans, but they were clean, well-fitted. His eyes were clear. He looked like a man who had his shit together. Donovan just stared at him, too numb to even feel surprise. "Can I come in?" Caleb asked. Donovan stepped aside, and Caleb walked into the apartment, his eyes taking in the squalor, the empty bottles, the unwashed dishes piled in the sink. "I heard about what happened," Caleb said quietly. "I'm sorry." Donovan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Are you? Are you really?" Caleb didn't answer. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "What do you want, Caleb?" Donovan asked, his voice hoarse. "I wanted to see if you were okay." "Do I look okay to you?" Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I've been buying up some of the properties, the ones your guys were selling off. I'm rebuilding, slowly, carefully, the right way." Donovan felt a surge of rage, hot and bitter. "So you came here to gloat, to rub it in my face?" "No," Caleb said, and there was something in his voice, something sad and tired. "I came here to tell you that it doesn't have to end like this. You can start over. You can build something new." "With what?" Donovan spat. "I have nothing. I am nothing." Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out a check. He set it on the table. It was for $100,000. "It's a start," Caleb said. "It's what Dad left me. It's what I used to build everything I have now. Maybe it'll work for you too." Donovan stared at the check, his vision blurring with tears he refused to shed. "Why?" he whispered. "Why would you do this?" Caleb looked at him, and for the first time, Donovan saw something in his brother's eyes that he'd never seen before. Not pity, not contempt, just love.
If you're enjoying this story, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next episode.
"Because you're my brother," Caleb said simply, "and because I know what it's like to hit rock bottom, and because someone once gave me a chance, even when I didn't deserve it." He turned and walked to the door, then paused, his hand on the knob. "Dad was wrong about a lot of things," Caleb said quietly. "But he was right about one thing. The real test isn't how you handle success. It's how you handle failure. What you do next, that's what defines you." And then he was gone. Donovan sat there for a long time, staring at the check, feeling something shift inside him, something small and fragile and terrifying. Hope. 5 years passed. Donovan used the money Caleb gave him to start over. Not in real estate, he couldn't stomach that anymore. He started small, working as a consultant for small businesses, helping them with financial planning, strategy. It was humble work, unglamorous, but it was honest. He stayed sober. He went to therapy. He rebuilt his life, brick by brick. Caleb's company, Sterling Renovations, had grown into a powerhouse. He was one of the largest developers in Detroit, known for his integrity, his commitment to affordable housing, his refusal to cut corners. He'd expanded to other cities, Cleveland, Milwaukee, even back to Chicago. He was wealthy now, truly wealthy, but he lived simply, drove a modest car, worked alongside his crews. And then, on the 5th anniversary of their father's death, both brothers received a letter. It was from Jonathan Whitmore, the family lawyer. The letter was brief. "Please come to my office at your earliest convenience. There is a matter of some urgency regarding your father's estate." They arrived at the same time, Donovan and Caleb, standing in the lobby of the law firm, looking at each other with a mixture of wariness and curiosity. They hadn't spoken in 5 years, though Caleb had kept tabs on his brother from afar, quietly proud of the man he was becoming. Whitmore ushered them into his office and handed them each a sealed envelope. "Your father," he said, his voice grave, "left instructions that these were to be given to you on this day, and only on this day." Donovan's hands shook as he opened his envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his father's handwriting. "Donovan, if you are reading this, it means 5 years have passed since my death. I imagine you have been through hell. I imagine you have lost everything. I imagine you hate me. Good. You needed to lose, Donovan. You needed to fail. You were a weak, arrogant boy, and I knew that if I gave you everything, you would destroy it. And you did. I am not surprised. I am not disappointed. I am, in fact, relieved. Because now, perhaps, you have learned what I could never teach you. That wealth is not the same as worth. That success is not the same as character. That a man is not defined by what he inherits, but by what he builds from nothing. If you are still alive, if you are still fighting, then perhaps there is hope for you yet. Perhaps you have become the man I always wanted you to be. I leave you nothing, Donovan, because you need nothing from me. You have everything you need inside you. Use it. Your father." Donovan sat there, the letter trembling in his hands, tears streaming down his face. It was brutal, it was cruel, and it was, in its own twisted way, an act of love. Caleb opened his letter. "My dearest Caleb, if you are reading this, it means you have done what I always knew you could do. You have built something real, something that matters, something that is yours. I left you nothing because I knew you needed nothing from me. You had everything you needed inside you all along, the strength, the resilience, the character. I just had to get out of your way and let you find it. In this envelope, you will find the details of a series of offshore accounts, properties held in trust, investments that have been quietly growing for years. It is a fortune, Caleb, a fortune far greater than what I left your brother. It is your birthright, the birthright of the son who was always worthy. Use it well. Build something great. Make me proud. Your loving father, Harrison." Caleb sat there, the letter in his hands, the tears streaming down his face. Not tears of joy, tears of grief. Tears for the father he had never truly known. Tears for the brother who had been sacrificed on the altar of their father's twisted love. He looked at Donovan, and Donovan looked back, and in that moment they understood. They had both been pawns in their father's final, brutal game, and they had both, in their own way, won. They sat in silence for a long time, the two brothers, in the lawyer's office, the weight of their father's words hanging between them like a ghost. Finally, Caleb spoke. "I'm sorry." Donovan looked at him, confused. For what? For everything. For not being there. For not stopping you. For all of it. Donovan shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "You have nothing to be sorry for. You saved my life, Caleb. That check you gave me, it was more than money. It was a lifeline. It was hope." Caleb looked down at the letter in his hands, at the details of the offshore accounts, the properties, the investments, a fortune. More money than he would ever need. "I don't want it," he said quietly. Donovan blinked. What? The money. Dad's money. I don't want it. I built everything I have on my own. I don't need his validation. I don't need his approval. I don't need anything from him. He looked at his brother. But you do. You need to know that he saw you, that he believed in you, that he loved you, in his own fucked up way. He slid the letter across the table. Take it. Split it with me. Use it to build something new, something better, something that's ours, not his. Donovan stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. Caleb, I can't. Yes, you can, Caleb said firmly. We're brothers. We're family. And family doesn't leave each other behind. Donovan felt something break inside him, something hard and cold that had been there for so long he'd forgotten it was even there. And in its place, something warm, something real, something that felt almost like peace. Okay, he whispered. Okay. They started a new company together, Sterling and Sterling. Not real estate, not construction, something different, something that mattered. A foundation dedicated to helping people rebuild their lives after financial ruin. They offered microloans, business consulting, job training. They helped ex-cons, addicts, people who had hit rock bottom and were trying to claw their way back up. It was hard work. It was unglamorous. But it was real, and it was theirs. Donovan ran the financial side. Caleb ran operations. They worked side by side, two brothers who had been broken by their father's legacy and had rebuilt themselves into something stronger, something better. They never forgot where they came from. They never forgot the lessons they'd learned. And they never, ever took success for granted. Years later, on a cold winter night, Donovan and Caleb sat in the office of their foundation, looking out at the Chicago skyline, the city that had been their prison and their playground, their hell and their home. Do you ever think about him? Donovan asked quietly. About Dad? Caleb was silent for a moment. Then he said, Every day. Do you hate him? Caleb thought about it. No, he said finally. I don't hate him. I don't love him either. I just understand him. He was a complicated man, a cruel man, but he was also, in his own way, trying to teach us something. What? Donovan asked. Caleb smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That the only inheritance that matters is the one you build yourself. Donovan nodded, and they sat there in silence, two brothers who had been tested, who had been broken, who had been rebuilt, two brothers who had learned that the real legacy wasn't money or power or success. It was love. Messy, complicated, painful love. The kind of love that doesn't give up. The kind of love that endures. And in the end, that was the only inheritance that truly mattered.
Before you go, tap that like button, leave a comment to let us know what you think, and subscribe so you're always the first to hear our next story. Your support keeps these stories coming.